I'm Gary Walker. That's my introduction. No, I could get up here and give you a little BS. I've written quite a number of books on the war. Some of the things that have happened to me that I appreciate. I am in Who's Who in America. The state of South Carolina, their legislative section saluted me for my work in the Civil War field. And I'm an honorary member of the town of Saltville. So there are just little things that did occur. Don't want to spend too much time on that because I got plenty of things I want to talk to you about this evening. Now, why does our educational system teach us in school what it does? In the next few minutes, I'm going to cover over 300 years of history involving many millions of individuals. To say the least, I'm going to be doing it in highly generalized terms. When I finish, if we have time, I will take questions. We can go more into detail. I would say specificity, but that's just too big of a word for my mouth. Now, in general terms, what we're taught about the war that started in 1861 is that the only place in the South that had slavery was the southern states. The only place in the world had slavery was the southern states. The masters were the most wicked, evil group of people you ever did see. The sweet little slaves, they just wanted to be free, and every morning the master got out and he beat all these slaves. He beat them twice on Sunday to make sure he got them right. He ravaged the slave girls every other night. He would have done it every night, but he was too tired from beating them. Now, the Yankees never owned slaves. They loved black folks, and people in the South hated black folks. Lincoln ran for the presidency on a platform to get rid of slavery. Well, when he got elected and made the people in the South so doggone mad, don't you know, they all just decided to leave the Union. They were still mad about what was going on, so they attacked Fort Sumter. So they were the aggressors, and they forced the war on the Yankees, and the Yankees had no other choice but jump on their horses and ride south to the rescue of the poor black slaves and from the wicked masters. The entire war was about slavery, and one of the greatest presidents we ever had in the history of our country was Abraham Lincoln. That's what we're told, and not one word of it is true. Now, the war in 1861 has a variety of names. You'll catch me calling it the war between the states, but that's a misnomer. It was not a war between states. Virginia did not attack Pennsylvania, and New York was not a war with Florida. Lincoln called it a rebellion or a civil war. Well, it was neither one, because the people in the South were not trying to overthrow the government of the United States. It was never their policy to do so, and they never attempted to do so. It was not a civil war. You've heard it called a war of northern aggression. It was. But for a more definitive detail, look at it from the point of view of the United States. Remember now, we're the Confederacy, and our president is Jefferson Davis, not Abraham Lincoln. But for a more definitive look, but from the northern point of view, it was a war to destroy the Confederacy, to destroy Southern independence, to subjugate a free people and force them into a union they wanted nothing to do with. And believe me, the people both North and South in 1861 knew that, not what we've been told in the books. They were certainly aware of the situation. Now, I'll give you a little bit on the demographics of the time so you have a little bit better understanding. Now, the United States was only about 75 years old when the war started. So the people we're dealing with are the sons and daughters and the grandsons and granddaughters of those folks who fought the revolution and started the new country. Now, the people were well aware that when the state entered the Union, that the state remained a sovereign, independent entity. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say the state gave up their independence, their sovereignty. And the people back then, now, see, in the early part of the country, every few years there was another state entering the Union. So they knew that the way that the state came in or a territory became part of the United States, it petitioned the Congress, and then they had to have a plebiscite, a free vote of the people. The women couldn't vote, in that territory to see if they wanted to enter the Union. And so they knew that they entered the Union by free vote, and they knew by free vote that they could just take themselves out of the Union. It was never a perpetual Union. And they recall that in the early part of the 1800s, there was 5 northern states that started in motion to withdraw from the Union. It never came to fruition, but if they had the right to withdraw from the Union in 1800s, well, the Confederacy of the people in the South had the right to withdraw in 1861. Now the Yankees knew what they were doing was bad and wrong. And we'll tell you, what you do, a lot of stuff you will pick up on in the textbooks, but what I'm telling you is true. They had a tremendous guilt feeling for what they were doing. Now, whenever we as individuals do mean stuff to somebody else, we don't like to admit it, because if we do mean things and we admit it, well, it makes us a bad person. Well, collectively, the people up north didn't want to feel bad about what they were doing, and so they tried to figure out some ways around it. The things that we do to assuage our guilt when we do something wrong is a lot of times we'll say, you know, yep, I did something wrong, but not really the reason I did it was for some of the reason once you really did do it, because if you have a different motivation that isn't personal and selfish, it makes you feel so much better about yourself, don't you know? This is called justification. You just try to justify it in your mind. And then one of the great ones that people use is whoever they're mean to say, yeah, I was bad and I did something wrong to them, but they are so much more wicked and evil than I am. They deserve it, and it's okay for me to do it because I am better than they are. And these are some of the things that the Yankees try to come up with and to justify the unjustifiable things that they were doing. Now, a lot of people think that when Lincoln issued his Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, now, and by the way, Lincoln started the war. The Confederacy did not start the war, and of course the Yankee folks knew that. And Lincoln said over and over the first couple of years of the war that the war was not about slavery. Well, in 1863, that's when the Emancipation Proclamation went into force, and a lot of people think, well, all the Yankees were saying, yep, you know, the war's about slavery, don't you know? And well, always was. Well, it was not true. And they teach us in school that the Emancipation Proclamation was this great moral document, but bananas. Slavery was about money, first, last, and in the middle. And when you have a lot of money, that means you have a lot of power. When you have a lot of power, it's a lot of politics. But morality had very, very little to do with the institution of slavery. Once again, it's more about making money. Now, the only people that could claim that there was any moral assuaging to what they were doing were the abolitionists. Now, the abolitionists were a splinter group. They were extremely small but very vocal. You kind of can compare them to the Occupy Wall Street people today. There are very few of them, but they make a lot of noise and they give a lot of headlines in the newspaper. But most people, it wasn't a moral issue whatsoever. Now, how can I tell you that the people up north said, no, this war is not about slavery, even though Lincoln wanted to make it about slavery? I'll give you a little bit of an idea. Now, Lincoln issued the Emancipation not because of morality, and he had a number of things that he wanted to accomplish with the Emancipation, but the overriding reason for issuing the Emancipation Proclamation was the British Empire. At this point in time, Britain was the dominant world power. They had the big fleet, they could sail anywhere they wanted to in the world, and they could blow anything up they wanted to, and Lincoln was very fearful that England was going to come to the aid of the South, because the first 2 years of the war, England was constantly, now when I say England, I'm talking about the British Empire, moving closer and closer to giving support to the South. Well, why would the Emancipation block England or the British Empire? Well, in the 1830s, they had made it empire policy to get rid of slavery. So Lincoln was basically saying with the Emancipation, if you support the Confederacy, you're supporting a state that is dedicated to slavery. And we're dedicated to getting rid of slavery, don't you know? And so it's against empire policy. Well, it worked extremely well. From 1863, from the issuance of the Emancipation, England began to move further and further away from the Confederacy until she became belligerent against the Confederacy toward the end. Well, how can I say that the people up north totally rejected the ideal that the war was about slavery in 1863? Now remember, the two countries are at war, and desertion in wartime is often punishable to the soldier by death, a firing squad. Now, they didn't tell you this in school, but it's true, folks. 20% of the Union Army deserted because of the Emancipation Proclamation. And their big call was that we are not going to die to free the niggers. Now, in 1860s, the word nigger had no negative connotations. It just meant a black person. And let me throw in a little bit on top of it, even today it's not a bad word. A black person can call a black person a nigger, and nobody raises an eyebrow. They don't get in a fight over it. It's not the word nigger. It's about politically correct, controlling whitey and what we can say and what, pardon me, what we can think. We have to whisper the N word, but there's really nothing wrong with the word nigger. Got a little bit off on the subject. Let me see if I can go back where it's at. Okay, now about 20% of the Union Army deserted. A great many of the soldiers went to Canada, but some of them went to the territories. Most of them went back home. Well, Lincoln, you know, he can't have 20% of his army executed, so he issued a blanket pardon for all the soldiers who would return. Of course, the army knew where they lived, so most of them did come back, but it wasn't willingly. Now, when did the Yankees accept the idea that the war was about slavery? It was only after the war was over, the 13th Amendment was passed, and they started the miseducation in the school system. Now, because of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, whenever the Yankee armies went into the South, they destroyed a great deal of country and cities and this and that, but they also destroyed the institution of slavery. So whenever the gun sale fell silent, there was no slavery in the southern states, a form of confederacy. And they didn't tell you this in the school books, but it's true. The very last nation in the Western Hemisphere, the northern part of the Western Hemisphere, to have slavery was the United States of America, not the Confederate States of America. And it wasn't until this time that Grant gave up control of his slaves. Now, if the war was really about slavery, as they teach us in school, do you think the head general for the Union Army would have slaves that he had control over? I don't think so. But they did toward the end accept the fact that it was about slavery, and the biggest reason for that is it turned them from the villains that they were, destroying an independent nation and Southern independence and forcing people back in the Union. They turned into this moral cause, and they became heroes by changing. Now, before I leave this subject and go to the next one, there's one man we got to look at. That's Abraham Lincoln. Now, we were told that Lincoln always is the greatest president we ever had. Well, let's just see what kind of a record that the greatest president ever had. The first time he was elected, he was so loved, half the country left. That's not a very good way to get, you know, the greatest president. The second time he was elected, the only reason he got elected, he became a tyrant and a dictator.